Admiral Chester William Nimitz assumes command of the United States Pacific Fleet on December 31st, 1941, 24 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. He arrives by flying boat to a harbor still containing the wreckage of 8 battleships, 3 of them total losses. The Pacific Fleet has lost 2,403 men killed. The battle line, the core of American naval power in the Pacific, is destroyed. Japanese forces control territory from the Aleutians to Southeast Asia. The strategic situation appears catastrophic. Nimitz receives orders to hold Hawaii, support Australia, and prepare for offensive operations with whatever forces remain. He has approximately 3 operational aircraft carriers, a dozen cruisers, perhaps 40 destroyers, and 30 submarines. The Japanese Navy operates 10 carriers, 10 battleships, an overwhelming superiority in every combat category except submarines. Nimitz must rebuild a shattered fleet, restore morale among defeated personnel, develop strategy to counter Japanese expansion, and coordinate with an Allied commander, General Douglas MacArthur, who considers himself Nimitz's strategic equal and potentially superior. The war will last 3 years, 8 months. Nimitz will command throughout. His leadership style, emphasizing delegation, calm analysis, and strategic patience, will transform the defeated Pacific Fleet into the most powerful naval force in history. This transformation does not result from dramatic gestures or inspirational speeches. Nimitz is not that kind of leader. He is quiet, methodical, and deeply analytical. He listens more than he speaks. He delegates authority to subordinates and supports their decisions even when he privately disagrees. He maintains calm demeanor regardless of circumstances. These characteristics, unremarkable in peacetime command, prove decisive in wartime strategic leadership. The Pacific War requires coordinating operations across millions of square miles of ocean, managing multiple simultaneous campaigns, allocating scarce resources among competing priorities, and maintaining coalition unity despite fundamental strategic disagreements. Nimitz executes these requirements through systematic application of principles that appear simple but prove extraordinarily difficult to implement under stress. The first principle is acceptance of reality. When Nimitz arrives at Pearl Harbor, he receives briefings on the attack damage, available forces, and strategic situation. The briefings paint a grim picture. Some officers suggest defensive posture, holding Hawaii and perhaps protecting the West Coast while allowing Japanese expansion to exhaust itself. Nimitz rejects defensive strategy immediately. The United States cannot win through defense. Japan controls resources and territory that make extended war sustainable. American strategy must involve offensive operations to retake territory and destroy Japanese military capability. But the offensive cannot begin until forces are available and strategic approaches developed. Nimitz therefore accepts that the initial months will involve defensive holding operations while preparing for eventual offensive. The acceptance of reality extends to personnel. The Pacific Fleet before Pearl Harbor was commanded by Admiral Husband Edward Kimmel. Kimmel was relieved after the attack, officially for allowing the fleet to be surprised, though Kimmel argued he received inadequate intelligence warning. The relief created morale problem. Fleet officers divide into factions supporting or criticizing Kimmel. Nimitz addresses this by refusing to criticize his predecessor. He states publicly that Kimmel commanded competently with available information and that any officer might have made similar decisions. This position angers some who believe Kimmel should be held accountable, but achieves the critical objective of ending internal recrimination. The fleet can focus forward rather than relitigating past failures. The second principle is delegation with oversight. Nimitz commands forces spread across the Pacific. He cannot personally direct operations in multiple theaters simultaneously. He must rely on subordinate commanders. Vice Admiral William Frederick Halsey commanding carrier forces. Rear Admiral Raymond Ames Spruance commanding task forces. Vice Admiral Robert Lee Gormley and later Halsey commanding South Pacific. Various submarine force commanders, amphibious force commanders, and air commanders. These officers possess strong personalities, firm opinions, and varying degrees of aggressiveness. Nimitz's approach is to define strategic objectives, assign missions, provide necessary forces, then allow subordinates operational freedom to accomplish missions using their own tactical methods. This approach creates tension. Halsey, the most aggressive carrier commander, favors bold strikes deep into Japanese-controlled waters. Spruance, more cautious and analytical, prefers calculated operations with sufficient force to ensure success. The two commanders represent fundamentally different tactical philosophies. Nimitz uses both, assigning Halsey to operations requiring aggressive pursuit and Spruance to operations requiring careful execution. The carrier task forces rotate between commanders depending on operational requirements. This rotation allows Nimitz to match commander temperament to mission profile while preventing either commander from dominating carrier operations. The third principle is strategic patience. The Pacific War cannot be won quickly. Japanese positions must be reduced systematically. Each operation requires time for planning, force assembly, logistics preparation, and execution. Nimitz resists pressure from Washington to accelerate operations beyond sustainable tempo. When the Joint Chiefs of Staff propose operational timelines that Nimitz considers unrealistic, he objects formally and requests timeline adjustments. The objections are not dramatic refusals, but detailed analyses showing why proposed timelines cannot be met with available forces and logistics. The Joint Chiefs, presented with professional military assessment rather than emotional argument, generally accept Nimitz's timeline recommendations. The strategic patience extends to dealing with MacArthur. General Douglas MacArthur commands Southwest Pacific Area, a theater adjacent to Nimitz's Pacific Ocean areas. The boundary between theaters runs through the Solomon Islands, creating overlap in operational zones. MacArthur believes he should command all Pacific operations. He argues to Washington that unified command under Army leadership provides better coordination than divided Navy and Army commands. Nimitz disagrees but does not engage in public dispute. Instead, he coordinates directly with MacArthur's staff, shares intelligence, provides naval support for MacArthur's operations when requested, and maintains professional relationship despite strategic disagreements. The coordination proves challenging. MacArthur wants naval forces to support his New Guinea campaign. Nimitz wants to advance through the Central Pacific. The Joint Chiefs devise compromise, simultaneous advances along both axes. MacArthur advances through New Guinea toward the Philippines. Nimitz advances through the Gilbert, Marshall, and Mariana Islands toward Japan. The two advances support each other by dividing Japanese defensive efforts. The compromise satisfies neither commander completely, but prevents destructive competition for resources. Nimitz's approach to the compromise is acceptance with private reservation. He believes the Central Pacific route offers faster approach to Japan and better utilizes American naval superiority. But he recognizes that MacArthur's political influence makes the Army general's removal or subordination impossible. Nimitz therefore executes the dual advance strategy professionally, coordinating timing to maximize mutual support while pursuing Central Pacific operations with available forces. The development of island hopping strategy demonstrates Nimitz's analytical approach to complex problems. The Central Pacific contains hundreds of islands, many fortified by Japanese forces. The direct approach, capturing every island sequentially, would require years and enormous casualties. Nimitz's staff, particularly Spruance and the planning officers, develop alternative approach, bypass heavily fortified islands, capture strategic positions that isolate Japanese garrisons, use air and submarine power to prevent Japanese reinforcement of bypassed positions. The bypassed garrisons, unable to effect operations and unable to receive supplies, become strategically irrelevant. The strategy requires accurate intelligence about which islands are strategically necessary versus which can be bypassed. Nimitz establishes intelligence organization under Rear Admiral Edwin Thomas Layton that integrates signals intelligence, photo reconnaissance, prisoner interrogation, and captured documents. The intelligence organization provides assessments of Japanese force dispositions, defensive preparations, and reinforcement capabilities. These assessments inform target selection. Islands with airfields or harbors useful for subsequent operations are captured. Islands lacking such facilities are bypassed. The first major test of the strategy is the Gilbert Islands campaign in November 1943. The operation targets Tarawa and Makin atolls, selected because their airfields allow air cover for subsequent operations in the Marshall Islands. Tarawa proves extraordinarily costly. The assault on Bedio Island results in over 3,000 casualties in 76 hours of fighting. The casualties shock American public opinion and generate criticism of Nimitz's strategy. Some argue that bypassing more islands would reduce casualties. Others argue that better assault tactics would reduce casualties. Nimitz responds by ordering detailed after-action analysis identifying problems with landing craft, naval gunfire support, and infantry tactics. The analysis leads to modifications implemented in subsequent operations. The modifications prove effective. The Marshall Islands campaign in January and February 1944 achieves objectives with significantly lower casualties than Tarawa. The bypassing strategy leaves Japanese garrisons on Woche, Maluelap, Mili, and Jaluit without support. Defending islands the American forces never attack. The Japanese garrisons remain in place through the war's end, their thousands of troops unable to effect operations. The success validates island-hopping concept and establishes template for subsequent Central Pacific operations. Nimitz's management of subordinate commanders includes handling personalities that would challenge any leader. Halsey is aggressive to the point of recklessness. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, Halsey's decision to pursue Japanese carriers north leaves San Bernardino Strait unguarded, allowing Japanese battleships to attack the invasion forces. Only desperate defense by escort carriers and destroyers prevents disaster. The decision represents clear tactical error driven by Halsey's aggressive instincts. Nimitz could relieve Halsey, and some officers recommend this. Nimitz retains Halsey, reasoning that the aggressive instinct that caused the error is also the quality that makes Halsey effective in pursuit operations. Nimitz addresses the specific error through private discussion and modified operational guidance while maintaining Halsey in command. Spruance presents different challenge. Spruance is cautious, analytical, and risk-averse. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, Spruance declines to pursue retreating Japanese carriers, prioritizing protection of amphibious forces over destruction of enemy fleet. The decision allows damaged Japanese carriers to escape. Some officers criticize Spruance for excessive caution. Nimitz supports Spruance's decision, noting that Spruance's primary mission was protecting the Saipan invasion, which was accomplished successfully. The destroyed Japanese aircraft and killed pilots represent more significant loss to Japan than the carriers themselves. Nimitz's support for Spruance's cautious approach balances his support for Halsey's aggressive approach, demonstrating that both temperaments have appropriate applications. The relationship with subordinates extends to relief for cause when necessary. Vice Admiral Gormley, commanding South Pacific, proves unable to manage the complex Guadalcanal campaign effectively. Gormley's reports to Nimitz emphasize difficulties and request additional forces. Nimitz assesses that Gormley has lost confidence in success. In October 1942, Nimitz relieves Gormley and replaces him with Halsey. The relief is conducted professionally, with Gormley reassigned to other duties rather than publicly criticized. Halsey, assuming command, stabilizes the situation and eventually secures Guadalcanal. The relief demonstrates Nimitz's willingness to make difficult personnel decisions while maintaining dignity for officers relieved. The logistics management required for Central Pacific operations challenges traditional naval supply systems. The island bases captured in the Pacific lack port facilities, warehouses, or infrastructure to support large forces. Everything required for operations must be transported from West Coast or Hawaii. Fuel, ammunition, food, replacement aircraft, spare parts, construction equipment, medical supplies. The quantities are enormous. A fast carrier task force operating for 1 week requires approximately 400,000 barrels of fuel oil, 6,000 tons of ammunition, and 2,000 tons of food and supplies. Nimitz establishes forward supply system using floating bases, repair ships, ammunition ships, supply ships, tankers, and tenders that support fleet operations without requiring shore facilities. The floating base system allows carrier task forces to operate continuously for months, refueling and rearming at sea while maintaining operational tempo that Japanese forces cannot match. Japanese naval forces must return to major ports for replenishment, limiting operational endurance and creating predictable patterns. American submarines exploit. The American forces, supplied by mobile logistics, can sustain operations indefinitely. The logistics advantage, though less dramatic than combat operations, proves strategically decisive. Nimitz's strategic planning includes realistic assessment of casualties and public morale. The Pacific War generates substantial casualties. Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa all produce casualty lists that shock American public. Nimitz understands that sustaining public support for the war requires demonstrating progress toward victory, while explaining that progress requires sacrifice. He authorizes combat correspondents extensive access to operations. ensuring American public receives detailed reporting on campaigns. The reporting includes both successes and costs, building public understanding that victory requires sustained effort and accepting casualties. The handling of the Iwo Jima operation demonstrates this approach. Iwo Jima, a small volcanic island 8 square miles in area, is defended by 21,000 Japanese troops in fortified positions. The island's strategic value is its airfields, which provide emergency landing sites for damaged B-29s returning from Japan raids and bases for fighter escorts. Nimitz approves the operation despite projections of 6,000 casualties in 30 days of fighting. The actual results are 26,000 American casualties, including 7,000 killed in 36 days. The casualty rate shocks the public and generates criticism. Nimitz defends the operation by documenting how many bomber crews used Iwo Jima as emergency landing field, saving hundreds of lives. The justification is factual rather than emotional, presenting calculation that Iwo Jima's value justified the cost. The atomic bomb decision places Nimitz in supporting role. The decision to use atomic weapons against Japan is made by President Harry Truman based on recommendations from Secretary of War Henry Stimson and military advisors. Nimitz provides assessment that invasion of Japan, the alternative to atomic weapons, would cost approximately 100,000 American casualties and potentially millions of Japanese casualties. The assessment influences but does not determine Truman's decision. When atomic bombs are used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, Nimitz's public statement emphasizes that the weapons ended the war and saved lives that would have been lost in invasion. The Japanese surrender on September 2, 1945, occurs aboard USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Nimitz signs the surrender document as representative of the United States. The ceremony is brief and formal. The Japanese delegation, led by Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, signs the surrender instruments, acknowledging unconditional surrender. MacArthur, as Supreme Commander Allied Powers, presides. Nimitz's role is secondary to MacArthur's, but significant as representative of the naval forces that defeated Japanese Navy and carried American power across the Pacific. The Pacific Fleet on September 2, 1945, consists of approximately 40 aircraft carriers, 20 battleships, 60 cruisers, 350 destroyers, 250 submarines, and thousands of support vessels. This force, built from the 3 carriers and handful of other ships available in December 1941, represents largest concentration of naval power in history. The transformation from defeated fleet to overwhelming force occurred under Nimitz's command through systematic execution of strategic principles, acceptance of reality, delegation with oversight, strategic patience, realistic logistics planning, and effective personnel management. Nimitz's post-war service includes appointment as Chief of Naval Operations, the Navy's senior military position. He serves from December 1945 to December 1947, overseeing demobilization and transition to peacetime Navy. The transition proves challenging as naval forces reduce from wartime peak to peacetime levels while maintaining readiness for potential conflict with Soviet Union. Nimitz manages the reduction while preserving core capabilities, particularly carrier aviation and submarine forces. He retires from active service in December 1947 after 41 years of naval service. The assessment of Nimitz's leadership emphasizes characteristics that enabled success in extraordinarily challenging circumstances. He commanded forces across theaters spanning millions of square miles. He coordinated with Allied commander who considered himself equal and superior. He managed subordinates with strong personalities and conflicting tactical philosophies. He sustained operations requiring logistics unprecedented in scale. He maintained public support despite substantial casualties. He achieved these objectives without dramatic personality, inspirational oratory, or public displays of genius. He succeeded through competent execution of systematic principles applied consistently under stress. The comparison to other theater commanders illustrates Nimitz's distinctive approach. General Dwight Eisenhower commanded Allied forces in Europe through coalition management and political skill. General Douglas MacArthur commanded Southwest Pacific through force of personality and political maneuvering. Admiral Chester Nimitz commanded Pacific Fleet through professional competence and delegation to skilled subordinates. All 3 achieved success. The methods differed fundamentally. Eisenhower's strength was coalition building. MacArthur's strength was dramatic leadership. Nimitz's strength was systematic execution. The subordinate commanders Nimitz selected and supported achieved remarkable records. Spruance commanded at the Philippine Sea and Okinawa. Both strategic victories. Halsey commanded at Leyte Gulf despite tactical errors and conducted successful fast carrier strikes throughout the war. Vice Admiral Thomas Casson Kincaid commanded amphibious operations successfully. Vice Admiral Charles Andrews Lockwood commanded submarine forces that destroyed Japanese merchant fleet. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner commanded amphibious forces through major landings. These officers, selected by Nimitz and supported through successes and failures, executed the campaigns that defeated Japan. The strategy Nimitz implemented, Central Pacific Drive combined with Southwest Pacific Advance, proved more rapid than alternatives. Direct approach from Australia north through Netherlands East Indies would have required additional years. Defensive strategy holding Japan's perimeter would have allowed Japan to consolidate resources and possibly negotiate favorable peace. The Central Pacific Strategy, advancing through islands toward Japan while isolating Japanese garrisons and destroying naval forces, created unsustainable situation for Japan requiring surrender. The casualties required to execute the strategy totaled approximately 106,000 American military deaths in the Pacific theater. Japanese military deaths exceeded 2 million. Japanese civilian deaths from combat operations, strategic bombing, and atomic weapons exceeded 500,000. The casualty ratio demonstrates overwhelming American advantage in resources and capability, but also shows that victory required sustained sacrifice despite advantages. Nimitz's role in generating and managing these casualties deserves consideration. He approved operations projecting substantial casualties. He defended operations after casualties exceeded projections. He never suggested delaying or canceling operations to reduce casualties if the operations served strategic objectives. This calculus, where lives are expendable resources in achieving strategic goals, is fundamental to military command. Nimitz executed the calculus professionally without apparent emotional distress. Whether this represents admirable professionalism or concerning detachment cannot be objectively determined. The operations Nimitz approved achieved objectives at costs assessed beforehand as acceptable. The assessment proved correct in achieving victory. Whether alternative approaches might have achieved victory with fewer casualties remains unknowable. The island-hopping strategy left approximately 100,000 Japanese troops isolated on bypassed islands. These troops, cut off from supply and reinforcement, could not affect operations. Most remained in position through the war's end, surviving on reduced rations and waiting for relief that never came. Some garrisons suffered severe malnutrition and disease. After surrender, Allied forces accepted surrender of these bypassed garrisons. The strategy that isolated them proved successful in achieving victory while avoiding costly assaults. The Japanese soldiers bypassed experienced different war than those on invaded islands, surviving in isolation rather than dying in combat. The strategic choice to bypass rather than assault saved American casualties while condemning Japanese garrisons to years of ineffective waiting. Nimitz's memoirs and post-war writings emphasize lessons learned rather than celebrating victories. He identifies coordination among services as a critical challenge that was never completely solved. Navy and Army maintained separate command structures, separate logistics, separate planning. MacArthur and Nimitz coordinated through Joint Chiefs of Staff rather than direct unified command. This arrangement worked adequately, but created inefficiencies and missed opportunities for better integration. Nimitz recommends post-war reforms creating more unified command structure. Some recommendations are implemented in Department of Defense reorganization following National Security Act of 1947. The technological developments during Nimitz's command transformed naval warfare. Radar, developed early in the war, improved continuously and became decisive advantage in surface combat and aircraft direction. Proximity fuses for anti-aircraft ammunition, introduced in 1943, dramatically improved anti-aircraft effectiveness, improved torpedoes, fixing problems with Mark 14 that plagued early war submarines, enabled submarine campaign that destroyed Japanese merchant fleet. Aircraft development produced fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes with improved performance. These technologies, integrated into fleet operations under Nimitz's command, created capability that Japanese forces could not match. Nimitz's personal characteristics receive less attention than his strategic decisions, but prove relevant to understanding his command effectiveness. He maintained calm demeanor regardless of circumstances. Subordinates describe him as imperturbable, showing no external signs of stress despite commanding operations where thousands of lives depended on his decisions. This calmness influenced staff atmosphere. The Pacific Fleet headquarters operated professionally without drama or panic. Problems were analyzed methodically and solutions implemented systematically. The organizational culture reflected the commander's temperament. The relationship with his wife, Catherine Freeman Nimitz, provided personal stability during war years. Catherine remained in the United States while Nimitz commanded from Pearl Harbor. They communicated by letter regularly. The letters, preserved and later published, show personal side that contrasts with professional demeanor. Nimitz expresses concerns about operations, frustrations with Washington, and affection for family. The personal correspondence reveals emotional dimension not visible in professional interactions. The death toll under Nimitz's command, 106,000 American military killed, represents more deaths than any other American theater commander except Eisenhower in Europe. Each death was individual tragedy for families and communities. The aggregate number, while necessary statistical measure of war's cost, cannot capture individual loss. Nimitz approved operations knowing thousands would die. The approval was military necessity based on strategic calculation. The personal impact on Nimitz of approving operations that killed thousands cannot be determined from available records. He performed his duty professionally. Whether performing that duty exacted psychological cost is private matter. Nimitz did not discuss publicly. The assessment of Nimitz as quiet strategist emphasizes contrast with more dramatic commanders. MacArthur cultivated public image and used press masterfully. Halsey generated headlines with aggressive actions and quotable statements. Patton in Europe combined military competence with theatrical personality. Nimitz generated few headlines. His press conferences provided information without drama. His public statements emphasized factual assessment rather than inspirational rhetoric. His command style avoided theatrical gestures. This quietness, combined with professional competence, achieved results that dramatic commanders might envy. The final measure is results achieved. Nimitz assumed command of defeated fleet in desperate strategic situation. He returned 3 years, 8 months later, having commanded forces that defeated Japan completely. The Japanese Navy was destroyed. Japanese territory was occupied. Japanese military was disbanded. American forces dominated the Pacific absolutely. These results derived from systematic application of strategic principles under Nimitz's command. The principles were not innovative or dramatic. They were competent execution of professional military planning applied at scale never before attempted. The transformation from 3 carriers in December 1941 to 40 carriers in September 1945 required industrial production beyond Nimitz's control. But the strategic employment of those 40 carriers and all other forces assigned to Pacific Fleet was Nimitz's responsibility. The employment succeeded. The island-hopping campaign advanced at sustainable pace. The carrier operations destroyed Japanese air power. The submarine campaign destroyed Japanese merchant shipping. The amphibious operations captured key positions. The logistics supported continuous operations. The coordination with MacArthur maintained strategic coherence despite command division. All these successes occurred under Nimitz's command through delegation to skilled subordinates, careful planning, realistic assessment, and patient execution. Admiral Chester Nimitz died on February 20th. 1966, at age 80. His memorial service at Golden Gate National Cemetery included full military honors. The service emphasized his service to the nation and his role in Pacific victory. The service did not emphasize his quiet competence, his systematic approach, or his professional management style. These characteristics, critical to his success, are difficult to commemorate in memorial services that favor dramatic narratives. But the characteristics were real and they were effective. Nimitz succeeded not through brilliance or inspiration, but through consistent application of sound principles by a professional officer who understood his responsibilities and executed them competently under extraordinary pressure. That is the story of the quiet strategist who took command of a shattered fleet and rebuilt it into overwhelming force that achieved complete victory. The story lacks drama, but the results speak clearly. The Pacific Fleet on December 31st, 1941. Was defeated. The Pacific Fleet on September 2nd, 1945, was triumphant. Nimitz commanded throughout. The transformation occurred under his leadership through methods that emphasized delegation, patience, and professional competence rather than dramatic gestures or inspirational leadership. The methods worked. Japan surrendered. The war ended. Everything else is historical detail on the fundamental fact that Nimitz succeeded completely in the mission assigned him when he assumed command of a broken fleet in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor.